Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Hello, wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of the Web Platform Podcast. I am one of your hosts today, Justin Ribeiro, and with me, as usual, host Danny Blue.
Hey, everybody.
And host Leon Revill.
Hey, everyone.
Leon, we've seen too much of each other lately.
It seems like it.
Between the conference, which I hope all of you out there came and listened to 16 amazing talks on web components. But Leon, I'm just tired of looking at your face. I'm sorry. It just...
Thanks.
I'm going to send you a postcard from now on.
I was telling you guys yesterday that regardless of how it actually went, you guys seem as though you knew what you were doing.
Of course we did.
Yeah. We knew exactly what we were doing every step of the way.
You know, we battled several storms. Legitimately, like the lights were flashing here.
Physical storms.
Yeah, physical storms. Like it was 50-mile-per-hour gusts outside, and the windows were shaking. But yes, we survived, and it went off without a hitch. And thank you so much for all the speakers and everyone who attended. Thank you, Danny. You gave a very lovely talk.
I did give a talk. It actually went. I went back and listened to it, and it went better than I thought. Because I hate that. Like, I never go back and I don't like going back and listening to the podcast. I don't like going back and listening to record. So I said, yeah, it's that weird thing of just hearing your own voice, and you're like, oh God, I sound like that. But overall, it went pretty good. I'm actually gonna work on that talk a little bit more, and I think I might give an updated version of it somewhere, or turn it into a blog post.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, it was quality. And today, speaking of more quality things, we're episode 125. We're going to talk about Angular CLI and things. Of course, you got always that things. So what helps us expand. Yeah. So where should we start? Because as someone who doesn't use Angular, like the CLI, what is CLI? I don't know the words or letters. Is that a word? A word now, isn't it?
It is pretty much. It's one of those things that I think eventually the actual what it actually means is going to be lost. I mean, everybody's going to know what it is, but nobody's going to know what it stands for. We're not there yet, but so for anybody that doesn't know, CLI stands for command line interface. So any of the cool tool, curl is a command line interface. Most things before the world of GUI, there was CLI.
Brilliant.
I don't know that I've heard it called CLI in the span of like 20 years of doing things, but that is I'm going to steal that now. From now, I'm just going to CLI. Are you working on the CLI today?
But yeah, start that revolution.
Oh man, please don't. That's a terrible idea. This is already a bad start.
That is everyone, if you're listening out there, the CLI, no, it's now CLI. This is the way. Look, someone write an RFC.
This is the problem. This is what's been holding the web back all these years. This is how it starts.
To avoid going terribly off topic, again, I'm in Justin's camp here. I'm not particularly familiar with newer versions of Angular, and specifically the CLI or the CLI. So, Danny, you're most familiar with this. Could you just tell us exactly what the Angular CLI is, what it does, kind of why do people use it, what problems does it solve?
Sure. So Angular CLI is an official tool from the Angular team for helping you build Angular 2 and up applications. So it does a few things for you. It has a development server built in, so you can just run ng-serve and you'll get your live reloading and all that kind of stuff. It has baked in functionality for generating production builds, for debugging unit tests, and it also includes a set of generators for generating different. So if you need a new component, you can just run ng generate component, your component name, and it will generate the component file for you, the unit test scaffolding for that component, and it will automatically add that component to the your Angular module declaration array, to the closest module that it has, or you can specify exactly which one it needs to get added to. So it takes care of some of the boilerplate for you. If anybody, so I know a lot of people, especially in Angular 1, probably used things like the Yeoman generators that were out there. Angular CLI is similar to that. It's also, when it first started, it was actually based very heavily off of Ember CLI, which has a lot of that functionality as well. I don't know how much of the Ember CLI source code is still left in Angular CLI, but I know there was some, because I think Ember CLI uses Broccoli as the build system and all that fun stuff, and that is what Angular CLI used at the beginning.
Okay, I've got a quick question. So you mentioned about how people, using Angular 1.x would use something like Yeoman. But that was obviously quite an optional thing. So I've, developed with Angular 1.x for years, and I've never used the Yeoman generators. So when you develop Angular 2 or 4 applications, is there anybody that doesn't use the CLI, or is it so ingrained with that? Is it assumed that people will just use that kind of?
So there are definitely quite a few folks out there that don't use the CLI, that opt for their own Webpack builds, and the CLI is not good for everything, because sometimes you just end up with a weird, very specific situation, and the CLI doesn't give you sometimes doesn't give you the flexibility to do what maybe you've decided that you need to do. I do like, if anybody was, so like if you guys wanted to start out, it's like, I want to just play around with Angular, that would be the first, that's how I would recommend you get going, just because there's a lot of stuff you don't have to think about. And I think that's the big idea. That's the big idea behind it.
So is it just to get people up and running quickly with a particular application, or does it aid in like continuous development of that application, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, no. So so at the very beginning, so after you install it, you can run ng new, which will completely generate the entire base application for you. Install all of your dependencies and things like that, and then you can just hit npm start and start working. We have where I work, we currently have one Angular application built with the CLI in production now, and we have two others in the works right now. So we're using, and one of the use cases is a non-standard use case, and it's actually something I talked about on an episode of Adventures in Angular a few weeks ago that we can link to, because I don't want to go into all that stuff now. But so we are using it for everything. So it does help through the entire process.
Cool, that's really good.
Yeah,
I mean, are clays the way to go, or is the CLI is the thing? Like, I know, Leon, this goes into your question, I think we have here.
Yeah, so kind of I was thinking earlier, CLIs seem to be, well, most frameworks nowadays seem to have a CLI, where, a few years ago, that wasn't really a thing. Does that mean that frameworks have just got too complicated now, that it's just too hard to get up and running, that CLIs are required just so people give it a go? Or
so I think it depends on your point of view. So I'm trying to think how to best dig into it. So and I actually think going back through history a little bit is a good way to think about it. So if we say we start at Angular 1 or Backbone or something like that. The way that you got started was that you included a script. You included a script file in your HTML document, and then you included a script file in your HTML document, and you were kind of off and running. You could then start you look at the docs console.log out to see what all this stuff was in there, and go for it. So that was really easy. But even then, you still started to build up these big tool chains. Because it's like, okay, well, all this is working, but I need to make sure that I minify, minify all of my JavaScript. I need to make sure that I minify my CSS. So you started getting these. Getting these big tool chains, and something like React comes along. So people are already kind of used to tool chains, but realistically, with React, like it's one of those. It's not required, but it's kind of required to use some sort of a build system. When they didn't, you kind of introduced JSX to the world at large, and to do that, it requires a build time step. So people started cobbling together, their Webpack configs and getting it up and running. And so there's a meme out there that's just some guy standing in front of a giant blackboard or whiteboard or something with like lines and math and all that kind of stuff all over the place, and it says like after 3 months of work, somebody is finally ready to start building their React application. So the idea was that it was very complicated. The first kind of all-in-one CLI that I remember was actually the Ember CLI, and it was a bit easier for Ember to do, I think, because Ember is very opinionated on its own, and so because of that, it was fairly straightforward then to just introduce more. For them to introduce more opinions via their CLI. Plus, it gave you the generators and that kind of stuff. But it took all the configuration stuff out of it. You just had to install one dependency, which was Ember CLI, and then you could start creating Ember applications. And now React has Create React App, and of course, so all of the React-like libraries. So like Inferno has Create Inferno app for its various versions. Vue.js has, I'm actually not sure if it's Vue or if they call it Vue.js. I'm not sure, but Vue has its own CLI, and I think that one of the more complicated parts is that everybody is using modules now in some aspect, and that is one of the more, I feel like it's one of the more complicated parts of getting everything up and running is configuring all of the modules. I know I've kind of gone off a little bit, but I'm going to get back to like, are they too complicated? But so to that, the CLIs, I guess the build tools have kind of grown with the community, and so when Webpack, you think of Browserify. So people are like, okay, well, I'm going to include Browserify in my existing Gulp pipeline for building stuff so that I can use modules now. And after you start doing that, you can start using like the different transforms and stuff like that. Since everything is going through the modules, you could then transform your ES6 code into ES5 code so that you could so that it can run in the browser. So a lot of modern frameworks, and Angular I think is a very good example, seems built with those assumptions in mind already, that is what people are willing to do. Because Vue, for example, you can still just include a single JavaScript file and you're off and running. You can kind of do that in Angular, but not really. Like I've tried to do it a few times and just use vanilla ES5. It works. It's not nice. It's better than it was when it first started, but it's just not. You miss out on a bunch of this stuff. So for those that don't know, Angular 2 and up, the main language that it's written in is TypeScript. The framework itself is written in TypeScript, and the majority, I would say the majority of the community also writes in TypeScript. So with some of those assumptions in mind, it seems that straight away that they decided that they wanted to build a CLI because they're assuming people want to use modules, they're assuming people want to use TypeScript. This way it's if you've ever heard somebody say that they're just abstracting the scary away, and that's kind of what they're doing. So now if you want an Angular application, you don't have to read through a bunch of different docs, figure out how to it's like, okay, how do I just compile TypeScript? And then how do I use Webpack to compile my TypeScript? you just let the CLI do all that for you. And one of the new features in the RC actually that is still being worked on is actually something similar to what React does, which is have an inject command. So what Create React App does is you can use Create React App to merely type away and build your application. And then when you run into these scenarios that maybe don't fit into its, like you need to add a custom loader or something like that, you just run the eject command and it gives you all of the Webpack config that you can modify as much as you want.
So
Yeah.
I think one of the key things you said there was that the idea of cobbling. You know, the thing about CLIs is that it sort of prevents you from cobbling, which when framework land can be problematic when you build big things, right? I mean, obviously everyone can design their own tooling. You know, we have custom tooling where, you know, it's very specific targetings and things like that where, you know, a off-the-shelf framework CLI isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And that's fine when you have people to support it. When you don't, and you're trying to sort of be ever presently understanding that maintenance is also a key to making sure your software continuously runs, a CLI is useful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Angular CLI, the newest, looks pretty trick, right? It takes a lot of the headache about how you want to do things in that ecosystem, because again, they're opinionated as to how you should do things, which if you're a developer jumping between teams could be very useful, right? I don't have to learn an entire new tool chain to figure out this is how I need to build and actually do my job.
And so like so I work for a startup. We're pretty small. So a lot of times people think you only want these things if you have really large teams. Because somebody needs to hand it off to something else. I think it's things like this are equally as important for small teams that potentially change often. Like they're going to, like we're growing. There are going to be new people. There are new people going to be coming in. We had one developer leave since I've been here. So it's just when things move this fast, at least that part is stable. You don't have this person comes in and adds their flavor to it, and then the next person comes in and adds their flavor to it, and then the third person comes in and is like, what happened? What is this?
Are you saying you don't like my Perl build script?
I think you made another really good point earlier, Danny, about some of the new features we use today. I mean, a few years ago, we wouldn't have been considering using AS 2015. TypeScript wasn't a thing, and there wasn't all these things that require build steps as much. So the fact that you need those things now, people want to use modules, people want to use these newer features. You kind of need a lot more tools to get started. So obviously having a CLI, just like you said, abstracts away the scary to pull all these things together, so people don't have to worry about that stuff, but still get the benefits of these new features. So I think that was kind of a key thing I took away from your answer there.
Yeah. And so I think fundamentally, like you were asking, are they too, are modern frame? I mean, let's not even just say modern frameworks. Let's just say Angular specifically. That's what we're talking about. Is Angular too complicated? I would say no. It is complicated, but it appears to be with good reason and very well put together. And I'm not speaking to the guts of the framework at large, but overall, like how you get an application from A to B. So because the other thing that I actually failed to mention, I mentioned TypeScript. One of I'd say potentially the biggest feature in Angular is the ahead of time compiler. And so it has its entire own tool. So for those that don't know, the ahead of time or AOT compiler for Angular. So Angular uses templates. It's got its directives and ng4 and all of that fun stuff. There's always a compile step, whether it's in the browser or at build time. So in the browser, it has to parse all of that, turn it into executable JavaScript, and then run it. What the AOT compiler does is it lets you do that at build time. So Angular 1 also had a compiler that was built in. It just wasn't nearly as complex as the 1 and 2, as far as I understand. So what the AOT compiler lets you do is it lets you turn all of your templates into JavaScript at build time, which gives you a couple huge advantages. One, it's faster because the compiling doesn't actually have to be done in the browser, and you also don't have to ship the compiler code to the browser. So with that, and that's very awesome. Like that's a very, very cool thing that I find really fascinating, and I thought was actually really interesting when I was first started looking into Angular stuff, and they were just kind of whispers about what it was. The problem with it is that that can be a bit annoying to work with. And what the CLI team has done is they've built a Webpack loader that handles the AOT compilation for you. And so you can actually go and use the loader separately if you have your own Webpack build, and that's what's used internally inside of the CLI. So that would be, so that's maybe one additional step that something like Angular has versus something like React, where so you have your TypeScript code, but you also have the AOT compiler. So like they actually have a project. It's called not called Angular CLI. It's called Compiler CLI, which is a drop-in replacement for TypeScript. Is what it is. So the idea is that it runs through this first, turns all of your code into, turns all of your templates into TypeScript, and then you run that through the TypeScript compiler, and then you can do the tree shaking and all that kind of stuff over the compiled code. So that is one step, and it's not like if you like read early articles, it's like here's how to get ahead of time here's how to get AOT compilation in your Angular 2 apps. It is not easy. It is not a straightforward process to do. So I would think that's potentially one of the reasons that I think Angular needs a CLI, or at least more tooling built around it than potentially other frameworks would. It's very cool though. It's like I'm kind of making it sound bad. It's not bad. It's very cool. But it's just it's so nice to have the help.
I'm so scared.
Well, it's also tough. That's actually one of the issues that pops up on, like I hang out in the CLI issues quite a bit. That's one of the things that pops up all the time is because this is all done at build time, all of your decorators for Angular need to be statically analyzable. So like there can't be any function calls in them. They can't pull values that don't exist at build time. For example, like if you're trying to configure a provider to provide the window or document object, those don't exist at build time. So you have to treat them a little bit differently. Like using a factory function that returns window or returns document versus use value and stuff like that. So I don't know. The AOT compiler is sometimes both a gift and a curse when you're trying to explain to somebody the cool stuff about Angular.
So how has the feeling been around the RC? Because RC0 just landed thereabouts?
The 25th. I'm looking at the changelog right now. The RC0 was on the 25th.
How has the sort of feeling been about it? Because I'm always curious, like how do developers interact with the tools that actually get built that, ideally they have feedback on?
Yeah. So overall, it seems really good. So what I actually kind of want to do is go back a little bit at the beginning to how we got here and how people are behaving to it. So the CLI used to have a ton of breaking changes all the time, and people were actually getting really upset about it. The biggest breaking change happened quite a while ago now, but so I said earlier that the original CLI, Angular CLI, was based off of Ember CLI, which used Broccoli as a build tool. So it used Broccoli for like compiling TypeScript and things like that, and it used System.js to as the module loader. This actually was proving to be pretty to cause a lot of problems just due to unfamiliarity with the tools, and because System.js is kind of where it sits in your infrastructure, you have to interact with it, and that made it a little bit difficult. And so like there was actually like a comment blocks in certain config files, and so like don't edit anything below this, because the CLI would actually have to write to those files or whatever to configure your stuff. Made it tricky to work with third-party libraries and stuff like that. And I like System.js. I think a lot of stuff about it is very cool, but when you're trying to create kind of this mass market tool like they're trying to build with the CLI, it starts to provide a lot of problems. And so they changed the guts to be Webpack. And they had quite a few specific Webpack betas. And that's when here we first started using the CLI for our own stuff. So we used the CLI for a little bit with System.js and Broccoli. Decided we didn't like it a whole lot and did our own Webpack build. And then after the CLI switched to Webpack, that happened. I was actually looking back at like an earlier prototype of something that we built, and it was still using, very specifically, it was still using Angular CLI 1.0 Webpack beta something or whatever. So that was huge, and so there's a lot of churn there. As people are like, okay, well, I need to bring all of my stuff that I had here, and certain things, circular dependencies do not work in Webpack; it will explode. And it sometimes can be kind of mysterious what is happening.
Webpack? No.
But so eventually everybody moved over to that, and there seemed to be a bit of a and for a while, I mean, it's in beta. Like the guys that working on the CLI are doing a really good job, and they're putting a lot of really good stuff in there. But so things are changing pretty rapidly, and like every once in a while you see people featured issues come up that's really just somebody complaining that something's broken, that it worked last time and it's not working now, stuff like that. So there's been a lot of work to try to get that stuff working. They've done a great job with the docs, trying to explain so here's what's breaking, here's what you need to do to update, and that kind of brings us to the RC. Based on what I've seen in the community, the reaction to the RC is overall positive. And one of the things that they have said, the team has said, is that they pushed like from beta 31. So there's beta 31, beta 32, and then RC 0. From beta 31 to 32, they put a bunch of breaking changes in there. And they did that because they said once they hit RC 0, they didn't want to introduce any more other breaking changes, unless, of course, it's they find it absolutely necessary. And so this was actually a big kerfuffle with the Angular not CLI, but the Angular RCs. Because ng modules was a completely new construct that was introduced in like RC6 or something like that. That a lot of people weren't happy about. They're like, this isn't an RC because it's introduced, and I mean, and I'll be honest, like a pretty significant breaking change. But so they seem very cognizant about that now, and they said they were getting in all the changes that they felt they needed to be complete. And now now they're saying that there are no breaking changes planned for RC, and I believe they're trying to follow Semver as well. So overall positive. There's that jump between beta 31 and beta 32, and even that's really not bad. Like there's even just some little stuff like the config file for Angular CLI is angularcli.json. They've changed it to .angularcli.json. Don't really know why, but they did. So there's stuff like that has to change. They added some new config stuff for TypeScript, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think I see that complaint for other things too. Like, the beta broke my stuff, and now I'm sad because I shipped on the beta, and I probably shouldn't have shipped on the beta. Maybe I shouldn't have built on it for prod. Like, there is a line to be drawn there, because and this happens for a lot of web things too, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like actual primitives and APIs and things, which is we got to break it first so that we don't ship something horrible that is going to pigeonhole developers overall. I mean, that'd be bad.
Yeah, and a bit some friendly advice to pretty much anybody that if you're using any open source software, especially if you're using beta open source software, read the change log, please. Just like I know a lot, and it always happens. But you know, like something else comes out, there's a breaking change, and immediately you get issues saying that something broke, and you're like, it's broken. So read the change log. The people in the issues are there to help, help you get going, and be nice.
Yeah, that can be, that's a triage nightmare though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you end up having sitting there going, okay, you've given me it is broken information.
Yeah.
So did the beta break it? And then you got to go through that process. Basically, I mean, and GitHub templates help this out for issues, admittedly.
Yeah. So I actually have so after you're done, I want to diverge a little bit.
Diverge, Danny. Diverge.
Okay. All right. So I actually wanted to ask what you guys thought about GitHub issue templates. I was on Twitter yesterday, and I actually feel bad. I don't remember who it was. Said that like, does anybody else not like issue templates? And my response was like, as soon as the issues stop being it's broken, then we wouldn't need them. But it brought up a good point that was like, do they actually help? Like, do they actually help solve that problem? Because you still end up seeing in a lot of, this is not just the CLI, but in a lot of projects, you see a lot of issues where there is an issue template, but it's not followed. And then the immediate couple of comments under it are, please, asking for the information that was originally in the issue template. So I'm curious in general about, like, what makes a good issue template versus a bad issue template, and if there are other ways, because really all it is trying to get as much information up front so that everybody can be as helpful as possible.
Yeah, I think it's very easy for people to ignore them, but you've got to have somewhere to start, haven't you? You've got to have some information so somebody knows at least start of what they need to include. Yeah, it's difficult, I suppose. If the huge templates that ask for lots of information that can put people off, if the too brief, then you might as well not have them at all. So I suppose it's a balancing game, and I suppose it depends on the community and the project and stuff as well.
Yeah,
it's tough. Especially open source stuff, tough. Because to your point, like, some people are not particularly nice. Like, they demand answers now. That's not conducive to a conversation about trying to resolve something.
Yeah.
But I think decent templates are a good start point. Ideally, to Leon's point, like, if they're too long, you don't get contributors, right? If you're like, well, did you run this obtuse command that I didn't really document, but it's kind of in the issue template? That's not a good way to run it. But at the same time, like, the balancing act is hard. Like, some projects are not huge. Even when they are, and you have someone triaging and you have a template and everything else, you still have to go through and try to validate even the smallest properly templated one, because you might have a legitimate issue. Posting angry GIFs, of ranting things is not the way to go. That's not nice.
Yeah.
Don't do that, people.
Yeah, that's tough. It's like that. Just always remember, like, if you're filing an issue, and so this is actually just I think it's just general good advice. Before you file an issue on a new on an open source project, try to do a little bit of digging to see if a similar issue has already been opened, or something or opened and then closed, and it goes the same way for pull requests and all that kind of stuff. If there is an issue template, try to follow it as closely as you can. And sometimes there's just weird issues, right? And you're like, so like, especially if it's like, so like a lot of the issues so like in the Angular CLI issue template, for example, it asks you to run, ng version, and it gives you the version of the CLI and all of the Angular libraries you have installed and stuff like that. Well, when the issue is, I can't run ng version, it makes it tough, right? It makes it tough to do that. But yeah, just remember that everybody's there to help.
Yeah,
Well,
and
help us help you, right? That's the
yeah, the more information you provide about the particular issue, obviously, the easier it is for somebody to pick up and fix and get back to you. So the more information you provide, you're only helping yourself, really.
Yeah.
but yeah, issue templates. I think they're a good
And
thing. I
yeah,
think
like
contributing templates are a good thing too.
yeah.
You know, for any project with, you know, similar complexity. I mean, you look at, I mean, even like the Angular CLI, they have like hints for development. Like, I
Yeah.
think that's great. Like, you should hint people out. And you see a lot of projects like this now, just not, you know, framework CLIs. Like Lighthouse has like, oh, here's some things of how it works and how you build and things. Here's how you debug it. Like, those are good contributing objects to help your project sort of, you know, grow.
Yeah.
And which is, you know, nice for me because if I find a bug, you know, that's a rabbit hole for me because I'm going to go, well, where's the repo? Oh, they have a few development steps. Do I have time to fix this? Maybe. Let's see. And then 3 hours later, you're like, what was I supposed to be doing? Just lost track.
Yeah. So getting back to the CLI a little, the Angular CLI, and before we potentially go on to other stuff, I wanted to point out some of the cool new things that made it into the RC. One of them is the eject command, which is really good, and I feel like it potentially may have been in beta 32, but I don't know for sure. But I know it's in RC0. Eject is very cool, and will hopefully, even if you get started with CLI, you don't have to worry about being stuck in CLI world. It should be pretty easy to move out outside of it. I know they changed it so that there are separate TS config files for your different environments, or not different environments, but your dev server running, your end-to-end test running, because those were always one of the things that was tricky when you needed to have. So like for if you're going to run Phantom.js, for example, instead of Chrome, maybe you need different TS config options than you would for Chrome. Different things like that. The ASCII art was also updated, which is very important.
You can never have enough good ASCII art. I'm just saying that right now. Like your CLI, like there were a lot of CLIs out there, but art, that's what wins me over. Little animated robot.
Yeoman is one of my favorite ASCII art ones. So it's like whenever you finish it, you guys look out with the hat. Love it. So good.
It's the flourishes, just the niceness.
You could say it's the bridge between the clay and the GUI.
Oh no! Oh,
see, that term is gonna stick. That's
no, it's not.
It's
Don't
use it in my next talk. It's gonna happen. People feel like, what is he saying?
That's a terrible idea.
Yeah, I hope nobody's kind of joined this session halfway through. I think we're all completely insane.
So, I mean, looking at the Angular CLI,
yeah,
with like the Polymer CLI and some of the other ones, like they're sort of module built, right? So, like if I don't want to use Polymer CLI, I can actually use bits and pieces of what makes up Polymer CLI in my custom build scripts. So I can go and run, my service worker gen, or if I want to do my vulcanize or whatever it is. I mean, is Angular CLI set up sort of the same way? Because they have the concept of plugins, right?
No. So at the moment, they do not have the concept of plugins. So that's something. Yeah, no. So that is something that is coming. I can't tell you when it's coming because I don't know. I do not work on the project. I'm just going to make something up and hope that date hits. But I know it's.
And now someone's going to improperly quote me.
I was about to say it's out there. I know it is something. I know it's something that they are working on. I think it's a post V1 thing. I know there were quite a few people, including me, that was so Ember CLI has this concept of blueprints. So you can do stuff like creating custom blueprints. If you want to generate a component a certain way or something like that, you can generate this new blueprint that's local to your project, and it will use that. I actually implemented something similar in a Yeoman generator that I used to use for Angular 1, where you could override the templates for a directive or something like that to use and if it found it, it would use your directive template instead of the one that was installed through Yeoman. But that concept was never fully supported in the CLI. And I know that especially when they switch to Webpack, one of the really common things that people want to do is add their own loaders to it. But the CLI team seems to they've taken a pretty strong stance that they don't want to expose Webpack in that way because they say that Webpack is kind of an implementation detail of the CLI. That you should view the CLI the CLI is the build tool. The fact that it uses Webpack under the hood is inconsequential. So they are working on some sort of an add-on system, and I think fundamentally I agree with that statement, based on kind of like because it is very opinionated, and fundamentally I do think I agree. But so because of that, they will have to do their own sort of add-on system. I've no idea. Like, I'm sure they're thinking about it. I have no idea like when it would come. I also think the eject command is a really good, maybe call it a stopgap, because if you do need to do something custom, you can eject the application and use that out and use that on your own. But yeah, no, the plugin system is a big thing that a lot of people do want from the CLI.
Well, I mean, I understand the reason not to do it initially.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Oh, I also didn't fully answer the question. So no plugin system. But what they do have, the big thing that they provide that you can use entirely independently of the CLI is something called ng tools webpack, which is the thing that does all the AOT compilation and things
so
like
you
that.
can use it separately.
You can use that separately as well. It lives in the same repository, but it is published as a separate package. So you can use that part, and that is the most complicated part of a lot of it. At least the way it seems to me is that is one of the most complicated, because that handles all that AOT stuff that I was talking about. That's not totally user friendly to use. So that's a big one. So like, and everything else it does, SAS compilation and things like that is all done with existing loaders already. So again, if you wanted to cobble, you could cobble it together on your own. You see a decent number of issues of people messing with that stuff. I actually think there's another AOT loader that's being worked on by the folks at Angular class. That would call Angular class? Maybe. But yeah, I think there's another AOT loader that's being worked on that's fast enough that you don't have to use that. They say it's fast enough that you don't have to use the dynamic the in-browser compiler for your development either. You can always use AOT for dev and prod, which would be cool. So right now, Angular CLI, if you look at the main.ts file that's generated, it's using Platform Browser Dynamic, which includes the compiler in the browser. But when you do a production build and you run ng build -prod, it swaps that out for just the normal platform browser. But that's some of the magic. But it does all that under the hood, so you don't have to maintain multiple main.ts files and multiple ts config files and that kind of stuff.
That's intriguing to me, actually, because there's been a lot of chatter about the notion of developers having trouble understanding how to ship production versions of particular things.
Yes.
Whether that's React or Angular or whatever it might be.
Yeah, because there's also like for React, there was somebody was saying there were a lot of people that were actually shipping the dev version of it still,
which is a horrible thing to do, like perf wise. Like, don't do that. Should CLI tools like Angular CLI, where you're running in sort of dev mode, like, should there be ginormous warnings like injected saying you are still in dev mode on this build?
So I will say
here too.
Yeah. So I will say that if you in CLI world, in the Angular CLI world, as soon as you run prod, you're doing AOT, you're doing and realistically, if you're going to ship an Angular 2 application to production, you really need to be doing AOT. The perf gains for it are they're too big. They're too big to ignore. I think. I don't think that they are too big to ignore. But so that is one of the nice things is that as long as you do -- prod, you do get like it does all that stuff for you. But I mean, you could still just run the ng build and ship that to production if you really wanted to. Oh boy, should you not? But you could. So it's so I don't know. So I don't know how to warn what I don't know the best way to handle that type of thing. So like I know Webpack in Webpack 2 there's a configuration option where it will actually warn you if your individual chunks are too big.
Addy wrote an RFC for that, right? I think so, right? About like whatever.
So I remember seeing him talk about it, and I remember Sean Larkin was talking a lot about it, but I mean he works on Webpack, so he would be interested in Webpack things. But so there are things like that. So like these performance audits that are out there, and it to help throw these warnings for stuff. As far as the CLI, the one warning that CLI does give you is that if you run ng serve prod, it will throw a warning because it will serve like the AOT compiled and gzip code and that kind of stuff. But there's a big old warning on that says this is not a production server.
Don't run.
Yeah.
Don't.
Yeah.
Don't deploy.
No, and I remember. So like I remember, but
noted.
Yeah, so we're laughing about it, but I mean, but if it's something that you don't know, like that's actually a really important warning to show. I remember one of the first times I was using a generator of some sort. So I don't remember how many years. It was a Yeoman generator. I do not remember how long ago it was. I'm probably just blocked it out of my memory because it's probably embarrassingly close to now. But at the time where it's like I ran npm you could run npm start and it would start up the server, and it is a server. You can put it on another box, make sure the ports are correct, and it will work. So that is one warning that is thrown if you do try to do that. I don't know how else you can really warn somebody without, whenever they're running in dev mode, just be like, just so you know, you're running in dev mode, which maybe it does already, because Angular itself does that. If you look in the console and you haven't called enable prod mode, if you open the console for each Bootstrap module it has, it's like you're running in dev mode. But that doesn't account. You don't need the AOT compiler to make that go away or anything like that. So I don't know. It's a
notification is hard because I think
it
does that too, right? It'll say, "Oh, you're running dev mode in the console," and even for web other things, like when the console fires up and it's throwing errors, like, do developers see those errors? When you're starting out, you might not. Like, you may not know the console exists within that realm, which I think is fair. Like you're coming into it and you've started to build something, and you don't necessarily know how the entire stack of things works.
Yeah.
Which I think can be problematic when you're shipping prod.
Yeah. That's another thing to remember. We're talking about being nice in GitHub issues and stuff like that. Like, also remember, like, if somebody asks a question that you think is dumb, at some point you didn't know that either.
True.
So regardless of what it is, at some point you didn't know it.
Which for me is usually every morning. Like I'm not an encyclopedia of things. That's why I read issues. Like, I'm like, oh, is that a bug? I wonder why that does that.
Yeah.
I didn't even know it did that. I'm learning. Always be learning.
Big old tattoo. Always be learning. Yeah, I know we're starting. Leon's picking us. I know we're starting to run out of time. But there's one other bit of open source advice for people that want, because sometimes open source stuff can be really scary. If you want to be involved in open source, find a project that you use a lot. If you use Angular CLI a lot, if you use React a lot, whatever it is, follow the issues. And a lot of times issues get filed that you know the answer to. And sometimes it's a non-issue, sometimes it is. We're like, I know how to do that. And that is a really good way to contribute to that community, is helping people work through problems that they have that you've already had and already solved.
Yeah, I lurk on a lot of mailing lists and never say anything. Just trying to sort out exactly like how that project works, because a lot of projects are, they're big projects out there. Like, I hang out on Chrome and Blink mailing lists and Mozilla ones and things, and like, you just to understand what's going on, and the idea that I can ideally contribute to help sort of move those things along. But it can be scary, I don't think I'll be posting on the Linux kernel mailing list anytime soon, for instance. That list is terrifying. It's terrifying to me, maybe not to listeners out there. Maybe not the one to start on. Just random Justin opinions.
All right, Justin, take us home.
So we've been talking about Angular CLI, CLIs and the CLI, as it were. What have we missed, kind sirs? CLI? I don't know. CLI? Sly.
This is a terrible ending.
horrible ending.
Just to recap, though, some really important things in this episode. Number one was, if you're using open source beta software, unless you want to live very dangerously, read the changelog. That's one important thing. The other important thing is, the CLI will now be referred to as the CLI.
I can't.
And RC0 is out now.
Yes, RC0 is out now. Based on the information that I know, there are not supposed to be any more breaking changes in it. So if you've been waiting to check out the CLI, I think now's a really good time. They're bang on it, see what breaks and file issues if you find something.
And that issues tracker is on GitHub under the Angular org. So
yes, yep,
it's open. You can go and contribute now.
Yeah. I have one other point to make before we leave. The docs on the CLI.angular.io, at least the last time I looked, are very, very out of date. Do not look there right now. I actually think that's for. I know that's something that's being worked on, but at least at the time of this recording, I believe they're pretty badly out of date.
So head to the tracker.
Head to the tracker. Head to the GitHub repo.
I think that's a good place to stop. So this has been episode 125 of the Web Platform Podcast. We have been your hosts, Leon, Danny, and Justin, and we hope you have a wonderful web development week.
Goodbye,
Catch
everybody.
you all next
Bye.
week.
You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at the Web Platform, or on Google Plus and YouTube at +the Web Platform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization.
Contact Eric Isaacson at @eIsaacson
or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.